much for taking the time to talk with us. We are here in Bucharest with some of your fans here, and we're so delighted to have you here via Skype. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here virtually. I guess my physical body is in Oakland in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I'm trying to project my sort of brain stage vector over to Bucharest, and happy to talk to you and answer any questions you might have.
Perfect. As you might know, your third book of the trilogy, The Causal Angel, was just launched here in Bucharest almost a month ago for our big fall book fair. So we will talk a lot tonight, but we have to be careful about spoilers because some of the readers might not have read it yet here. So, okay. So first things first. You are a man that wears many hats. You have a PhD in mathematics. You worked in physics and string theory. You're a world-famous sci-fi writer, and in the past years you become an entrepreneur. How do you juggle between these, and do you have a favorite hat?
Favorite hat. So I think that in some way all the hats are the same hat. I mean, I think the sort of all my hats somehow relate to science, to sort of understanding how science relates to human experience, how we can use science to solve problems, and how we can sort of try to understand the complexity of our evolving world. Can you still hear me, by the way?
Yes, we're good. Is it okay?
Hey, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Is it okay now?
Okay. I'm sorry. So how do I sort of juggle between those? It sort of requires a bit of discipline. So I usually do most of my writing between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. So actually kind of just immediately before this time slot for me, and then that's kind of a meditative thing that kind of gives you a good start for the day, and then feeds all the other more starter-related activities later during the day. But there are also periods when sort of one thing kind of emerges as the main priority and takes over for a while. So most of the novels, including Causal Angel, were sort of written. The sort of first drafts were written during quite sort of intense bursts of sort of 7 to 8 weeks of writing, which at the time was kind of more all-consuming. But I think I don't see the different things as distinct. But there's sort of, I've had many examples in my career where, for example, with my previous company, some of the things ideas around quantum communication that are explored in the quantitative and also the later books actually led the UK Ministry of Defence funding my previous company to do research to sort of explore how some of those ideas could be implemented in practice. So, and right now I'm sort of working on a new book which is related to synthetic biology and biohacking, so sort of in the same way. And those are of course areas my current startup team is focusing on. So they kind of all meshes together or gets entangled.
Perfect. So let's go back to the beginning. How did you start writing?
So it goes back to very nerdy roots. So as a teenager growing up in a small town in Finland, I was very heavily into tabletop role-playing games. So games like Dungeons and Dragons and many others like Cyberpunk 2020 or sort of pretty much any sort of 80s, 90s tabletop RPG you could think of. But I was usually the game master whose role was to sort of create the world and try to facilitate an interesting story or an experience for the players. And a little bit later at university, I also became involved in the Swedish live-action role-playing scene, where you kind of actually dress up and physically interact with people, sort of like improvisational theater. That's actually artistically quite ambitious in the Nordic countries, where people organize games not just on fantasy, but also sort of very human issues. Like one of my favorite games of all time, for example, involved playing an old person in a nursing home. And so when I came to the UK to do my PhD and to study, I sort of lost touch with that community, and I wanted to do something, but I still wanted to do something creative. And I first explored theater, but then actually ended up going to a spoken word event in Edinburgh with this then relatively unknown guy called Charlie Stross as one of the lead performers, and but besides Charlie's story, I also enjoyed everybody else who sort of presented their work at that event, and then sort of realized that maybe actually writing fiction could be something fun to do. And I approached Gavin Ingalls, who's going to be MC of the group, and asked if it was possible to do this kind of thing. And it turned out they had this monthly writers group where people met and sort of critiqued each other's work. And I submitted the stories of that group and was sort of lucky enough to be admitted. And that's kind of how it started. So I then figured out having that monthly meeting of the group was a good way to have a deadline every month to produce some work and get initially some very brutal and honest feedback. But yeah, that's how it started.
Perfect. So you had you written before that in Finnish, or did you start writing in English?
I had tried a couple of short stories in Finnish, but I would say that I really seriously started writing with that group in Edinburgh. So that was primarily in English.
But you have written since both in English and in Finnish.
Yeah, so I've sort of written a couple of short stories in Finnish, which I've actually translated into English, and I think sort of vice versa also in one instance. And it's sort of so it's quite an interesting experience to write in Finnish after having written fiction in English for a long time. It's a very different experience. I think your native language or your first language does kind of get embedded deeper into the brain as you grow up as a child. So it felt like suddenly I was sort of on a different planet. It's a little bit like those sort of John Carter Mars books where he's suddenly able to take these giant leaps where the gravity is less. So that's sort of how then writing in Finnish felt like for the first time in a long time. But I also found that I was kind of sloppier writing in Finnish. It's because in English I'm sort of used to being very careful to sort of check every sentence and check grammar and things like that. But in Finnish I wasn't really doing that, so I found that the stories I wrote in Finnish require actually a lot more editing than the ones I wrote in English did. So the sort of I like to write in both. I think for sort of practical reasons I do mostly end up writing in English, but I think it's important to sort of maintain connection to different parts of your brain.
But do you feel that there are stories that come naturally in one language or another?
There's certainly concepts and ideas that come naturally in one language or the other, and the way you sort of approach them is also very different. So I think one characteristic of English is that the vocabulary of English is vast, because English is sort of this amoeba or sort of grey goo that has absorbed words from all other languages. So it has this enormous vocabulary. So when you want to describe something, typically you pick the right word that already exists. Whereas in Finnish, which is kind of more fluid and sort of has more compound words, and it's sort of easier to make up new words to describe some concept that you want to describe. So actually, in that sense, Finnish sort of yields itself quite well to fantasy and science fiction, because you kind of can easily invent new words. But then Finnish doesn't necessarily have the sort of scientific vocabulary that English has. So that sort of makes it a little bit harder. But yeah, I think that there's definitely something to that. I mean, I think for me, and then of course it depends on what your relationship to the language is personally. I mean, for me, Finnish is the language of sort of personal emotions and family and very close friendships and things like that. So I think the issues I write about in Finnish are probably more deeply emotional. And I actually tend to write some poetry in Finnish, but not really so much in English.
But then again, you do borrow a lot of words from other languages, from Hebrew, from Greek, from Finnish, and you incorporate them into your English. I mean.
Yeah, so that's certainly sort of a feature of the quantum thief novels for sure, where I did sort of want to well, it's sort of part of imagining a world where sort of all different kind of fragments of humanity have come together and diverse and sort of being mixed up all together, and you have these new cultures that are sort of amalgams of all kinds of existing neurodiverse cultures, ranging from sort of computer game online communities to communities of prisoners and so on. So it would sort of made sense for the quantum thief universe that there would be words from many different languages that would represent very particular concepts. And I sort of, like you said, I mean, certain languages do have words for concepts that don't exist in other languages in the same way. So it felt natural to try to find some of those curious specific words and use them. I don't know, Romanian must have some of those words too, although I confess I'm not familiar.
We do actually. This is more like a folklore. I'm not really sure if it's true or not, but we have this word called dor, which means, but can't really be translated as longing. But it's a longing. But it's but it's not exactly that. But that's the word we say. It can't be translated into other languages. But who knows? I don't know Finnish, for example. Maybe there's a word for that in Finnish. Because I'm very interested of this perspective of being an author, that has English as a second language, as many as are writers too. And so I was curious if you ever read the translations of your books into Finnish, and how that sounds to you.
So I did actually interact quite a bit with Antti Autio, who also the translator of my Finnish books, who books in Finnish, who also became a friend in the process, and so he did a great job of sort of choosing certain aspects to emphasize in the original and doing a beautiful translation into Finnish. So I mean, at first I certainly found it strange to read it, just because, as I said, like there are different parts of your identity that you represent in different languages, and there's kind of hearing the sort of English-speaking voice that I had in Finnish was kind of created this funny cognitive dissonance. But I actually did enjoy the process of working with Antti to figure out sort of good ways to represent certain things in Finnish. I mean, certain aspects get sort of lost. Like I think what I went for in many cases for its original was trying to tell things in a very concise way. So have sort of sharp, short sentences and crisp images, and then sort of in Finnish, all that description became sort of longer and more elaborate, but then also sort of gave it this different rhythm. So you can sort of I think get different aspects. It sort of becomes sort of a new work in a way when books are translated, and sometimes they can be better. Like Antti actually pointed out some plot holes that were sort of fixed in in translations, and funnily enough, so one of my favorite books as a teenager was Lord of the Rings, and I've read it many times both in English and Finnish, but I actually have come to prefer the Finnish translation in some way, partially because of the nostalgia and emotions associated to it, but also because it maybe tickles some very deep parts of my brain that English doesn't quite reach.
I feel the same about The Hobbit, to be fair. The Hobbit, that was my favorite book growing up, and I've read both the English and the Romanian translation, and the Romanian is closer to my soul because of the associations. So I can definitely understand that.
I think it's just a quick comment. I think it's kind of one beautiful thing about books is that besides the stories themselves, they come to represent some parts of our own identity, the sort of period of life when we read them and all the emotions and memories associated with them. So it's kind of superimpose those on the itself, and I think the language has a lot to do with that.
Exactly. So let's go back to your first experience writing. I'm curious how it was going from writing short stories to writing a novel. How was that experience for you?
So that wasn't completely straightforward. So when I got the deal for the quantum thief, I actually had never really written a novel, and I didn't have a good sense for sort of what is the nature of a story that you naturally tell in a novel. So I think looking back, kind of the way you can think about short stories versus novels is that a short story is this sort of basically in a short story one thing happens. There's some sort of one change, one event, one moment, one encounter, something quite discrete and unique that happens that you explore in that sort of short period of time. Now, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but that's how I would characterize a short story. Whereas in a novel, you have a character who goes on a longer journey, who really sort of undergoes some sort of fundamental change, interacts with people, finds out new things about the world and themselves, and then emerges or has to make a choice whether to change or not, and it sort of requires this longer form. And actually, when I started writing the quantum thief books, I had no idea how to structure that. So when I had this 3-book deal, the first outline, which was actually the entire quantum thief story outline, I intended to fit into one book. And I then started trying to write that book and struggled with it for a long time. But I kind of wanted to. So I had this opportunity. I wanted to put all the ideas and thoughts I had into this one book. And then a good friend of mine, Andrew Ferguson, also from this writers group in Edinburgh, pointed out that we were actually sort of spent this nice weekend in his garden in Fife in Scotland, trying to fix problems in each other's novels, and he pointed out that actually what I outlined were 3 books and not one book. So I then sort of took one portion of that outline, and that became the quantum thief. And then it was interesting actually the sort of overall arc of that outline did remain pretty much the same throughout the 3 books, but so there were other side journeys on the way. But for sure, it was a learning experience to figure out what is the story that can be told in a novel, and how it compares to it. Having said that,
Can you hear us? So can you repeat the last answer? I think there was a pause in the transmission.
Oh, okay. So I think what I was saying was the last bit I said was that that I really do like short stories very much, both writing and reading, and I think they're a great form for science fiction in particular, because you can kind of you have just enough space to explore that sort of one idea. And actually you can see that some of the best movie adaptations of science fiction stories do tend to be adaptations of short stories. And I think Arrival by Denis Villeneuve is a fantastic example of that.